Ladies and gentlemen, if you enjoy my video, please click the like button and share the video. It is the only way the YouTube algorithms really notices me. I will be very grateful to you. The child's laughter echoes from empty rooms. Scary story published by Scare Fiction. Read for you by Scare Fiction. Chapter 1. The Haunting Arrival. Emily Carter's hands trembled as she turned the key in the rusty lock. The old Victorian house loomed before her, a relic of a bygone era, its once grand fayade now draped in neglect. A chill wind swept through the small New England town, rustling the dying leaves and carrying with it an unsettling sense of foreboding. She glanced at the crumbling paint and the overgrown garden, wondering if this was a mistake. But the foreclosure had been too good a deal to pass up, and she needed a fresh start away from the echoes of her past life. Inside, the house was just as she had feared. Dust motes danced in the pale light that filtered through the grimy windows, and the air smelled of mildew and decay. The wooden floors creaked ominously beneath her feet as she and her young daughter, Sophie, stepped across the threshold. Sophie, clutching her stuffed bunny, looked around with wide, curious eyes. The house, with its shadowy corners and abandoned rooms, seemed to whisper secrets of its own. As Emily led Sophie through the cluttered rooms, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The house was silent, save for the occasional groan of settling timbers and the scuttling of unseen creatures in the walls. She tried to focus on the task at hand, unpacking, organizing, and making the place livable, but the atmosphere weighed heavily on her, every creak and whisper magnified by her imagination. It wasn't long before Sophie's voice cut through the uneasy silence. "Mommy, do you hear that?" Emily paused, her heart skipping a beat. "Hear what, honey?" Sophie pointed toward the staircase, her expression a mix of curiosity and unease. "I keep hearing a little girl laughing, but I'm the only one here." Emily frowned, attempting to dismiss it as a product of the house's age and her daughter's vivid imagination. "It's probably just the house settling, or maybe you're hearing things from outside." But as she climbed the stairs to check, the sound of childish laughter grew clearer, echoing through the empty upper hall. It was a soft, innocent sound, yet it sent shivers down Emily's spine. She reached the top of the stairs, peering into the dimly lit rooms. The laughter abruptly ceased, leaving behind a suffocating silence. Emily turned back to Sophie, forcing a reassuring smile. "It's nothing to worry about, sweetheart. Let's just finish setting up." Yet, as the day turned to night, the house seemed to settle into an uneasy stillness, as if it were holding its breath. Emily lay awake in her new bedroom, the sound of the child's laughter replaying in her mind, wondering if the house had secrets it wasn't ready to share. Chapter 2. Echoes of the Past. The house settled into a restless quiet as Emily lay in bed, the night's shadows stretching across the room like dark fingers. The unsettling laughter of a child still echoed in her mind, a relentless whisper that made sleep elusive. She turned over, trying to dismiss it as a figment of her imagination, but the sound seemed to seep into her thoughts, making her feel as if the house itself were alive. By morning, Emily was determined to make sense of it all. She went about unpacking with renewed purpose, attempting to drown out her unease with mundane tasks. However, as she dusted off old furniture and cleared out forgotten corners, the house's oppressive history seemed to weigh heavier on her shoulders. Around noon, Emily decided to explore the town, hoping to learn more about her new home. The streets were lined with charming, if slightly weathered, houses and quaint shops. At the local library, she found a small office labeled Historical Society and, after a few minutes of hesitation, stepped inside. Mr. Thompson, the town historian, was a middle-aged man with silver hair and a pair of glasses that perpetually slid down his nose. He looked up from his desk with a kind, though somewhat distracted, smile. Emily introduced herself and explained her curiosity about the house. "A historic place, you say?" Mr. Thompson's eyes twinkled with interest. "Ah, you must be talking about the old Whitmore residence." Emily nodded. "Yes, that's the one. I heard some strange things, and I thought I'd see if you could tell me more about its history." Mr. Thompson's expression grew serious. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "The Whitmore house has a dark reputation around here. The Whitmore family, Charles and Margaret Whitmore, and their 2 children moved in about 50 years ago. They vanished without a trace one cold winter's night. The police were baffled, and no clues were ever found." Emily's heart skipped a beat. "But why? What happened to them?" "There are theories, of course," Mr. Thompson continued. "Some say they were taken by something malevolent. Others believe the family fell victim to an unknown, sinister force connected to the house itself. Over the years, there have been reports of strange noises, sightings of a child's ghost, and other unsettling events." Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. "I found some old photographs and newspaper clippings about them," she said, pulling out the items she had discovered while unpacking. She laid them on Mr. Thompson's desk. Mr. Thompson examined the clippings and photographs carefully. His eyes widened as he came across one particular image, a little girl with hauntingly familiar features. "That's quite unusual," he murmured, his brow furrowing. "This child looks almost identical to your daughter, Sophie. It's as if there's a link between her and the Whitmore child." Emily's pulse quickened. "Do you think this is a coincidence?" Mr. Thompson shook his head slowly. "In a place like this, coincidences are rare. I'd suggest you proceed with caution. The past has a way of reaching out, especially in old houses like yours." As Emily left the library, the weight of Mr. Thompson's words hung heavily on her. The house seemed to pulse with an unseen energy, and the echoes of its past whispered more urgently than ever. She knew one thing for certain: she had to uncover the truth, no matter how chilling it might be. Chapter 3: The Darkening. The days grew shorter, and with each passing twilight, the house seemed to deepen into an unsettling darkness. Emily's initial attempts to acclimate to her new surroundings gave way to a creeping sense of dread. The child's laughter, once a distant echo, now reverberated through the house with unsettling clarity. It started softly at first, a faint giggle that could be mistaken for the wind. But as days passed, it became more frequent, more insistent, piercing through the walls and unsettling Sophie's sleep. Emily could no longer ignore the sounds. She would lie awake at night, listening to the dissonant echoes of the laughter and the shifting of objects in the dimly lit rooms. Last night, she had awoken to find her grandmother's antique clock, which she had meticulously packed and placed in the attic, now standing prominently in the living room, its pendulum swinging as if it had never been moved. She'd chalked it up to her own exhaustion or a lapse in memory. But now, with objects seemingly moving on their own and eerie sounds becoming a nightly occurrence, Emily's rationalizations grew thin. Her stress began to manifest in every facet of her life. At work, she struggled to focus, her concentration shattered by relentless anxiety. Meetings with colleagues became strained as she snapped at innocuous remarks, her nerves frayed by sleepless nights. Her interactions with Sophie were tinged with impatience and frustration. The once giddy chatter between mother and daughter dwindled into tense silences and strained attempts at normalcy. One particularly cold evening, Emily sat with Sophie in the kitchen, the atmosphere thick with unspoken tension. Sophie had been unusually quiet, her eyes constantly darting toward the hallway. "Mommy," she said softly, "the little girl is back. She says she wants to play." Emily's frustration boiled over. "Sophie, we've talked about this. There's no little girl. It's just your imagination. We need to focus on making this house our home, not on ghosts." Sophie's eyes filled with tears. "But I'm not imagining it. She's real and she's lonely. Why won't you believe me?" Emily's heart ached at the sight of her daughter's distress, but her own fears and doubts clouded her judgment. "We need to be strong, Sophie. This house is old and makes strange noises. I promise it's nothing more than that." That night, Emily's dreams grew darker. She found herself wandering through the house's shadowy corridors, encountering ghostly apparitions of the Whitmore family. In her dreams, the child's laughter morphed into a chilling wail, and the house's walls seemed to close in on her, revealing scenes of the past moments of joy turned to terror. She woke up with a start, her body drenched in sweat, the weight of the nightmares lingering. Emily knew she had to address the growing rift between her and Sophie, but the house's malevolent presence was starting to seep into her very soul. Each creak of the floorboards and each fleeting shadow seemed to whisper that the house's secrets were far from over. She had to find answers, or the darkness might consume them both. Chapter 4: Uncovering Secrets. The house seemed to breathe in the cold night air, each groan and creak a reminder of its haunted past. Emily's resolve had hardened. She needed answers, no matter how unsettling they might be. Determined to uncover the truth about the Whitmore residence, she spent the following days diving deep into its history. The local library's archives held little more than old newspaper clippings and faded photographs, but Emily meticulously combed through them. As she pored over the brittle pages, she discovered more about the Whitmore family. Charles and Margaret Whitmore had been prominent figures in the town, but their story took a tragic turn. Their son, William, had gone missing just before the family vanished, a fact that had been glossed over in local lore, but was now illuminated by the documents Emily uncovered. William had disappeared without a trace, and the family's subsequent disappearance had left the town in shock. Emily found a disturbing pattern. There were rumors of strange occurrences and a rising sense of foreboding in the weeks leading up to the Whitmore family's disappearance. Townsfolk had whispered about unexplained sounds and eerie sightings, but no one had ever ventured a concrete explanation. Realizing that these reports aligned with the disturbances in her own home, Emily set up recording devices in the rooms where the laughter was most frequently heard. The devices were meant to capture any unexplained sounds, but what Emily heard when she reviewed the recordings was far more unsettling than she had anticipated. The recordings were filled with distorted voices and an unidentifiable, eerie hum that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. At one point, a child's laughter cut through the static, but it was warped and accompanied by a chilling, almost guttural undertone. It was clear that something beyond the physical realm was at play. As Emily listened to the recordings, she couldn't shake the feeling that the house was drawing from her own fears. Memories of her failed marriage and unresolved grief surfaced, intertwining with the haunting echoes. The house seemed to reflect her inner turmoil, amplifying her insecurities and amplifying her feelings of isolation. The ghostly laughter and the unsettling noises felt like a mirror to her own personal struggles. Late one night, as she sat in the dimly lit living room, Emily stared at the recordings, feeling a growing sense of dread. The realization that the house's haunting might be more than just a supernatural phenomenon. It could be tied to her own unresolved pain, was overwhelming. The walls of the house seemed to close in on her, making her feel as if the darkness wasn't just outside, but within. Emily knew she had to confront her fears head-on if she wanted to protect Sophie and unravel the mystery of the Whitmore residence. The house was no longer just a relic of the past. It had become a living nightmare, intricately connected to her own fears and regrets. As the laughter echoed through the empty rooms, Emily braced herself for the truth, knowing that the answer she sought might be more terrifying than the darkness itself. Chapter 5: Descent into Terror. The once charming house had transformed into a labyrinth of fear. Emily's nights were plagued by vivid hallucinations, shadowy figures darting in her peripheral vision, whispers in the darkness, and the ghostly child's eerie laughter that echoed louder with each passing day. The sounds seemed to seep through the walls, infiltrating every corner of her mind. Her dreams were no longer mere disturbances, but nightmarish visions of the house's past, each one more horrifying than the last. Sophie's behavior became increasingly erratic. She would wake in the middle of the night, her eyes wide with terror as she clutched her stuffed bunny. Her once lively demeanor was replaced by a distant, almost catatonic state. She muttered about the ghostly child, speaking to an unseen presence that Emily could neither see nor hear. Her once bright, inquisitive eyes now seemed clouded with an indescribable fear. Desperate, Emily reached out to friends and neighbors, hoping someone would believe her and offer support. But her pleas were met with skepticism and dismissive nods. "You're just stressed," they would say. "Moving is hard on everyone, especially a child. It'll get better." Even Mr. Thompson, whom she sought out again, merely patted her hand with a weary smile. Sometimes the mind plays tricks, especially under stress. Feeling isolated and abandoned, Emily's attempts to make sense of the escalating terror only drove her further into desperation. Her own fears grew, merging with the house's malevolent presence. It was as if the walls themselves were conspiring against her, amplifying her anxieties and distorting her reality. One rainy afternoon, as Emily explored the attic in search of some semblance of normalcy, she discovered something horrifying. Behind a stack of old, dusty boxes, she found a concealed door partially hidden by layers of cobwebs and old furniture. Her heart raced as she pried it open, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. With a flashlight in hand, Emily descended into the hidden room. The air grew colder, and the smell of mold and decay was overpowering. As she reached the bottom, she was confronted with a scene that made her blood run cold. The room was filled with disturbing drawings, crude, childlike depictions of a family in distress, interspersed with unsettling images of a shadowy figure. In the corner of the room lay remnants of a child's belongings, old toys, tattered clothes, and a small, dusty bed. It was clear that this had been a secret, hidden space, used and abandoned by the Whitmore family. A single drawing, prominently displayed, depicted a girl that looked almost identical to Sophie, surrounded by dark, menacing shapes. Emily's hands shook as she examined the drawings, a cold realization settling over her. The house wasn't just haunted, it was deeply connected to Sophie's own fears. The ghostly child wasn't merely a specter, it was a part of the house's dark legacy, tied intricately to the tragic fate of the Whitmore family. As she stumbled out of the hidden room, her mind reeling, Emily knew that the house's secrets were more dangerous than she had ever imagined. The haunting had become a personal nightmare, and she had to confront it head-on to protect Sophie from the encroaching darkness that threatened to consume them both. Chapter 6: The Revelation. Emily's hands trembled as she clutched the journal she had discovered among the hidden belongings in the secret room. The leather-bound book was old and weathered, its pages yellowed with age. She had found it tucked beneath a loose floorboard, its presence a silent testament to the house's dark history. As she carefully opened the journal, the dim light of the attic flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The journal belonged to Margaret Whitmore, the missing child's mother. Emily's heart raced as she read through the entries, each page revealing the unraveling sanity of a woman consumed by fear. Margaret's writing grew increasingly frantic as she detailed the descent into madness, her belief that her child, William, had been taken by a malevolent entity that haunted their home. "William is gone," one entry read, "taken by something beyond our understanding. I hear his laughter in the walls, but it's not his. It's twisted and cruel. The house has a hunger, and it feeds on our fear." The more Emily read, the clearer it became that Margaret had been tormented by an entity far more sinister than she had ever imagined. The entity was not just a ghost, it was a vengeful spirit, a force of pure malevolence that had been bound to the house by a tragedy long forgotten. As Emily closed the journal, a chilling breeze swept through the attic, and the house seemed to come alive with an ominous energy. The laughter that had once been a distant echo now roared through the halls, distorting into a malevolent cacophony. Emily's pulse quickened as she realized that the entity was no longer content with merely haunting. It was preparing for a confrontation. In a desperate attempt to protect Sophie, Emily gathered her daughter and fled to the main floor. The house was in chaos, doors slammed shut on their own, windows shattered, and the walls seemed to pulse with a dark, oppressive force. The laughter grew louder, more aggressive, as if the spirit was drawing strength from Emily's fear. In the center of the living room, the temperature dropped drastically, and the air grew thick with an unearthly chill. The ghostly child's laughter transformed into a guttural, inhuman growl as a dark figure emerged from the shadows. The entity was not a mere apparition, but a tangible, terrifying presence, its form shifting and writhing with malevolent intent. Emily stood her ground, clutching Sophie to her chest. "Leave us alone," she shouted, her voice shaking with fear and determination. The entity's form coalesced into a nightmarish visage, eyes glowing with a cold, vengeful light. It roared in defiance, its anger and sorrow blending into a force of raw terror. Emily felt an icy grip tighten around her heart as the entity lunged towards them, its presence overwhelming. In a moment of clarity, Emily remembered Margaret's words from the journal. The entity was bound by the house's tragic past, a force of vengeance that had consumed her and now sought to claim Sophie. With a surge of courage, Emily faced the entity, determined to break the cycle of fear and despair. "Your torment ends here," she cried, her voice echoing through the room. As if in response, the entity let out a final, anguished wail before its form began to dissipate, leaving behind an oppressive silence. The house fell eerily quiet, the laughter fading into the distance. Emily and Sophie were left standing in the aftermath of the confrontation, the oppressive weight of the house's dark history finally lifting. The truth was out, but the scars of the haunting would remain, a reminder of the ancient vengeful spirit that had once ruled their lives. Chapter 7. The Final Stand. The house was a battlefield of shadows and fear. Emily's resolve had hardened into a steely determination. She knew she couldn't face the malevolent spirit alone. After a terrifying encounter with the entity, she sought help from Dr. Daniel Stevens, a local paranormal expert with a reputation for dealing with the most insidious of hauntings. Dr. Stevens arrived late that evening, his equipment in tow, crystal pendulums, ritualistic candles, and ancient texts. His presence was a small beacon of hope amidst the encroaching darkness. Emily and Sophie, exhausted and fraught with anxiety, watched as he prepared for the ritual. This spirit is ancient and deeply rooted in this house's past, Dr. Stevens explained, his voice steady despite the chilling atmosphere. To banish it, we must confront its origins and force it to release its hold on this place. The ritual commenced as Dr. Stevens chanted incantations in a language Emily didn't understand, his voice resonating through the house's empty corridors. The air grew heavy with an oppressive weight, and the temperature dropped precipitously. Emily could feel the house's malignancy intensify, as if the entity was resisting with all its might. The room was lit only by the flickering candles, their shadows dancing like specters on the walls. Strange noises reverberated through the house, thumps, scratching, and the unmistakable echo of a child's laughter distorted into a menacing, mocking tone. The spirit's presence was palpable, its rage almost tangible. As the ritual reached its zenith, Dr. Stevens instructed Emily to join him in confronting the entity. "We need to face it together," he said, his voice firm yet compassionate. "Your personal connection to this haunting might be the key to breaking its grip." With a deep breath, Emily and Sophie followed Dr. Stevens into the house's darkest corners, the very place where the entity's influence was strongest. The walls seemed to pulse with an ominous energy, and the temperature dropped to an unbearable cold. Emily's heart raced as they approached the center of the haunting, a small, forgotten room in the basement, filled with remnants of the past and the echoes of the spirit's torment. Dr. Stevens directed Emily to recount the entity's history aloud, speaking of the tragedy and sorrow that had bound it to the house. Emily's voice wavered as she spoke of the Whitmore family and their lost child. The entity roared in defiance, its form coalescing into a terrifying shape of darkness and despair. The final confrontation was a maelstrom of light and shadow. Emily, Sophie, and Dr. Stevens stood united, their voices rising in a chant of liberation. The entity, now a monstrous silhouette of anger and agony, writhed and howled as if in immense pain. Its form began to dissipate, the malevolent force unraveling before their eyes. In a final, intense burst of energy, the spirit's form shattered into 1,000 fragments of darkness. The room fell silent, the oppressive weight lifting as the last echoes of the entity's rage faded away. Emily and Sophie were left standing in the stillness, their breaths visible in the now chilled air. Dr. Stevens sighed in relief, his expression one of exhausted triumph. "It's over," he said quietly. "The spirit is no longer bound to this place." As the first light of dawn filtered through the cracks of the old house, Emily looked at Sophie, their faces illuminated by a new sense of peace. The house, though still old and creaky, seemed lighter, somehow, as if the darkness had finally been expelled. The final stand had been made, and the haunting was at an end. Chapter 8: Aftermath and Reflection. The first rays of dawn crept through the dusty windows, casting a gentle light over the old house. Emily stood in the living room, which now seemed lighter, almost peaceful, after the climactic battle with the malevolent spirit. The oppressive cold had lifted, replaced by a warm, reassuring silence. It was as if the house itself was exhaling a sigh of relief, finally freed from the dark force that had plagued it for so long. Emily and Sophie had spent the last few days settling back into a semblance of normalcy. The chaos of the haunting was now a ghost of its own, lingering only in their memories. Sophie, though still shaken, had begun to smile again, an encouraging sign that the weight of fear was lifting. Emily, too, felt a sense of cautious optimism. The house, once a place of dread, was slowly becoming a symbol of new beginnings. As Emily unpacked the last of the boxes, she allowed herself a moment of reflection. The past few weeks had been a harrowing journey, but they had also been a time of profound personal growth. Emily had faced her deepest fears and confronted the shadows of her own past. The haunting had forced her to reckon with her vulnerabilities and find strength she didn't know she possessed. It was a transformation that was both painful and empowering. The house, now devoid of its malevolent influence, seemed to embrace this new chapter. Emily and Sophie set about redecorating and restoring it, filling the rooms with warmth and light. What had once been a place of terror was becoming a home again, a sanctuary where they could start fresh. But as Emily rearranged a shelf in the living room, she noticed something unsettling. A small, framed photograph she had found among the old belongings, a faded picture of a family, with a child eerily resembling Sophie, was missing. She had placed it on the mantel the previous day, but now it was gone. She searched the room, her heart pounding, but the photograph was nowhere to be found. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Emily sat with Sophie at the kitchen table. The house was quiet, but the silence felt uneasy, almost too complete. A chill crept through the room, and Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they were not entirely alone. She glanced at Sophie, who was quietly absorbed in a book, and then at the empty space on the mantel where the photograph had been. A sudden noise from upstairs, a faint, childlike giggle, made Emily's heart skip a beat. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. She knew it was probably just her mind playing tricks on her, but the sound was unmistakable. A reminder that, despite the house's apparent tranquility, something might still linger in the shadows. Emily's gaze met Sophie's, and she saw a look of uncertainty in her daughter's eyes. The haunting might have ended, but its echoes remained, a subtle reminder of the darkness that had once ruled their lives. Emily took Sophie's hand, their fingers entwining in a gesture of comfort and solidarity. The house was theirs now, a place of healing and hope. Yet, as the night settled in, the faintest hint of the old malevolence seemed to linger in the corners, a whisper of suspense that left Emily wondering if the entity's influence was truly gone or merely biding its time. The future remained uncertain, but for now, they would face it together, their spirits unbroken and their resolve stronger than ever.